humanoid. In our work, it actually seems to suggest that over these next 2 or 3 or 4 years, it's hard to say because our granularity runs out, but within the contact meme, that it's going to so accelerate that it will become common knowledge and, in fact, even spark fears, which I don't know if they'll be realized, but these fears would have people in rural areas sleeping with shotguns next to the door for fear of alien knock in the middle of the night, you know.
On the other hand, there's also some language, Cliff, that goes to alien wars, which we can't ignore.
Let's talk a little bit about that when we come back as well. Our two special guests tonight, George Ure, Clif High, two websites, urbansurvival.com, halfpasthuman.com, are both linked up at coasttocoastam.com. We'll talk more about this fascinating on Coast to Coast AM. Next up, we'll talk about UFO wars with the WebBot Technology Boys in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. UFO wars. We've got a guest, Ed Grimsley, who talks about UFO wars up there. What have you found on the web?
Our stuff actually would be better categorized as alien wars, because what we actually find is actually, beginning this year, we'd predicted that we'd start seeing an uptick in language that related war kind of things to interplanetary activity. And along on schedule comes NASA saying they're going to bomb the moon. And that was the launch off of the war plus alien kind of language or interplanetary language. So it goes and keeps going and building all the way through to 2011 as part of the uptick, if you will, or the growth of the contact meme, and then the two seem to merge about that same period of time. Our data, again, wouldn't allow us to say that we're going to be fighting aliens, or rather we're going to be sitting here observing aliens fight each other, or some some other third alternative that we just can't consider at the moment, that sort of thing. But it does seem very chaotic, and it seems that the expression of the alien wars is going to be so pervasive that it'll become a very much a common part of the daily discourse of the society, very much like must have occurred during the bombing of Britain, where everybody just kind of chatted about it or lived with it and the stress of it all. And at the same time, it permeated all the way down through their life because it affected everyone. That's what's coming towards us.
And at the same time, George, this isn't coming at us until we first go through the political disease crisis and possibly the new war problems to come this fall going into next spring. It really starts to pop up about midsummer of 2010 when we start getting into this part of the model where contact meme really goes out there with something that I think, Cliff, you refer to it as the non-Terran human named Cousin Alexei.
That was just, we have a weird, occasionally we'll be able to reach down in data in the detail layers, and we'll pull up a bunch of related lexical sets that hang together so convincingly, very much like the Northeast power outage, that we want to clump them all together. And it probably has to do more with my mind and any human mind seeking patterns than may actually exist. However, our data suggests that sometime in the chaos of next summer, in a diaspora where people are shifting around either from lack of food or political chaos, they're refugees, I don't know what the circumstances are, but it's chaos, people fleeing around, running around, we'll have some video crew out and about just interviewing people, it appears, on a man-on-the-street kind of thing, and they'll have to happen to interview a fellow recently escaped from internment. And this is probably not in the U.S., and the language would suggest that it may even be in the Baltic states or the Eastern European states or even in Russia. But in any event, this fellow is a non-Terran human and will be able to, unbeknownst to the video crew at the time, they'll capture on video basically evidence that proves that this is not a regular human because of something that will be exhibited in the video itself that they won't be able to observe at the moment, but which will be observable when it's actually displayed. Did that make sense? Did I explain that right, George?
Yeah, I think you did very well.
Yeah.
The phenomenon might be envisioned as, you know how every once in a while, George, people will take pictures with digital cameras,
yes,
and they'll capture orbs on them. You've talked about that many times.
Sure.
And it'll be that kind of a thing with a video. And I guess the only other bit of detail to add is the fellow should be young and bald.
And wizened in the sense of maybe, lots of excess skin or looks like an old wise man or something. The word wizened is applied to him repeatedly within the data sets.
You talk about American refugees, up to 200 million of them fleeing by the millions to Canada. What do you see on that?
That's okay. Now, this is where everything gets really terribly complex because there's a whole lot of major themes. If we were to imagine, we see an archetype. The archetype is lots of refugees fleeing north in the order of tens of millions, even hundreds of millions, and that's as far as we can go with any kind of confidence. Thereafter, when we start looking for detail to support that, what we kind of do is to try and look in our detail layers and pick out something that seems plausible to explain this. And it's at that point we start guessing, and that's why we get our detail levels wrong, but we may very well get the absolute perfection of the archetype itself. And so a lot of people will say, no, you didn't get this right, and they're quite correct. Our detail was wrong, but the archetype was accurate. In this case, the archetype is suggesting that fear is going to drive these people. Now, it's also a combination of fear of long-term in the sense of no food. There's going to be a giant food crisis, but I don't think that's the single motivator for this. It could be, for instance, that the radioactive volcano, which is one way of describing, or radioactive eruption, that may occur as a result of a presumed Israeli attack on Iran, creates a situation where people flee north because the jet stream is laden with something like plutonium-94 atomized to the point where a single particle is fatal, and it will be drifting down across the U.S. as the jet stream flows along. Now, this is just one example of what could cause this kind of an effect.
But that particular bit is supported elsewhere in the data because we have a huge conversion of people going from carnivore, omnivore to vegan diets.
Correct.
In this period of time. Now, that can also be because vegan diet is far more efficient in terms of feeding large numbers of people with a limited amount of resource than meat.
However, we do see that the planetary food body, as it currently is constituted, is affected, and that is to say that the farming of animals will be affected either by plutonium, because imagine a cow gets plutonium in it, you're not going to want to eat the cow.
Right.
And or it could be that there's some level of presumed contamination by a viral agent, and therefore, once again, you won't be able to eat the cow. Now, in this whole scenario, there are threads going back over to our entity that we call the powers that be, and it appears that this is part of the control mechanism that they're attempting to institute. So there will be destruction of food under some pretext, and it may just be simply a pretext. Nonetheless, the impact will be in an already exacerbated food crisis, that it's getting worse by the actions of the powers that be, and there is some motivation in the food issues to go north.
When do you see this migration occurring?
Probably in late 2010 or through into 2011. It's all jumbled up with this chaos. We start getting into the point where, as George had alluded to earlier, the compression of time and events, and it's made our data sifting, if you will, very clumpy. We can't really separate the way we used to even 5 years ago, and so that's becoming somewhat problematic. So it may be that we'll have to wait until we can get data, if at all possible, in the early part of 2010 before we get a clearer picture of the time frame of it. But it does not appear to occur in any sizable amount prior to July 7th of next year. Now, we have this issue of the dollar dying, and there's going to be pressures on the population that way as well, because as the dollar dies, and the American empire, as I said, it essentially rots out from the middle because we don't produce anything, and we've got to go through this chaos. That'll take a whole year, from November 4th of this year through to November 2nd of 2010, and it also participates in the push of the populace north. So we can't really say what is the cause. It appears that there's potentially multiple causes to get a lot of people to want to move north, and at some point it becomes very rapid. So there's a large fear component in it.
Are you concerned at all that government is not trying to fix any of this? Clearly, people should be looking at what's happening and trying to react to it.
Okay, I'm a linguist, and I get all bent out of shape, as Mr. Ure will tell you. I'm a terrible fellow to have to do business with because of this. But let me point out something. Within your language itself, you're expressing the idea of the Savior come to rescue you, and I don't buy that. So, no, I'm not concerned that government isn't fixing this, because government never fixes anything. The most they can do is legislate and spend money. They don't do either wisely. So I'm concerned that the populace expects the government to fix it, not that they're not doing it.
Well, that's true. That's true. But the question is, will anything be done?
Not at the official level, no, sir. And in fact, they're going to do things that will make it a lot worse. And in fact, they've even done so with the derivative problems and the bailouts. It's going to come crashing down on us as part of the chaos of this fall when the hyperinflation starts coming in.
So and the control mechanisms are slowly ratcheting up, George. If you watch them from my perspective as an armchair economist and a consultant, I see it very clearly. The Fed, for example, is starting to talk about taking on the super cop role. And yet whenever there is a threat in Congress to audit the Fed or to get the private banks that own the Fed to open up their books to close inspection and scrutiny so people can ask legitimate questions like, why are we paying rent on the nation's money?
Yeah.
Questions like that, the Fed will turn right around and make not very thinly veiled threats about how that could be, terribly disruptive to the market and could crash everything. Well, yeah. But on the other hand, there's a very good reason for asking those questions because the Federal Reserve is not federal in the sense that it's not owned by the government. It's the banks subcontracted out control of the money and got Congress to abdicate its constitutional role.
Good point. Good point. You know, this sometimes reminds me of the movie A Christmas Carol, where Scrooge is taken all over the place in the past, the present, and the future.
We are Scrooged. There's no question about it.
We live in very interesting times, and it's really strange when you start looking at some of the work of Kellerman and McKenna, how they describe the eschaton, the end of time, so to speak, and the Mesoamerican calendar, how they also discuss the compression of events within these periods as we go forward. And it's really woo-woo spooky that it's all lining up this way. At the same time, we see these people reacting as predicted.
Knowing what you know, what are you two doing for yourselves, the people you care about?
Well, that's two different issues. For ourselves, there isn't much we can do. We're hopeless cases there, but we're working very diligently to try and care for people. I'm trying to, make sure that I can grow food as well as keep some on hand, and I have my own power system. I'm capable of going almost a year without any external any mains power. This kind of thing. I'm preparing a little survival pod boat for when it's necessary to truck around because there won't be any roads. And I live on Puget Sound, which is a nice little waterway, and hopefully will be good for some level of communication with other people.
Is the name of the game to exist until they get things back in order again?
No. Once again, language, sir. They won't get things back in order. We have to do it. The human species is evolving and taking giant steps forward here that are chaotic and very much like a birthing process. We're about to go through a terrible birth canal that none of us really want to face, and we've got to start looking at our own language and our own level of responsibility. It will be us that fix it. It will be all of us together that create what we call the new electrics and the new economy that will see us through from 2013 on. And in fact, actually, it's being created now by inventors all around the planet, but not in the U.S. Turns out that the American empire is thought to be distinctly odd and stupid in places like Russia, China, India, etc., because we're not embracing the hyperdimensional mathematics that were really laid into electric theory by Maxwell. And in fact, we're buying this little dumbed-down version, and so we're missing huge opportunities that are going on around the rest of the planet.
Tell me about the death of the dollar.
It hurts. It hurts a lot. What most people don't understand is that the death of the dollar meme that we've been talking about for, since 2003, I think Clif mentioned. Yeah. What happens when the dollar gets revalued externally is that it takes more dollars to buy foreign-made products. And so at a macro view, what's going to continue happening is that the dollar will buy over time less and less oil. So that means it'll take more dollars domestically to buy oil, such that we'll hit a likely hyperinflationary period next year where silver, which can be purchased for under $14 an ounce now, may take $600 to buy an ounce of